The heat rose from the cracked earth in visible waves as I stepped out of the rental car. August in the Sonora desert was unforgiving, even for a seasoned journalist like myself. My editor had sent me here to investigate a story that had been buried for almost a century and a half, the mysterious disappearance of the Navarro family in 1882. "You'll need this," said Miguel, my local guide, handing me a wide-brimmed hat. "The sun will cook your brain otherwise, Ms. Reeves." I thanked him, adjusting my camera bag over my shoulder. We were standing at the edge of what looked like nothing, just miles of desert stretching toward distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. "It's about 2 miles that way," Miguel pointed. "The old Navarro homestead. What's left of it, anyway?" I'd been researching this story for months. The Navarro clan, a family of 12 who had settled here in 1880, had vanished without a trace 2 years later. Their disappearance had become local legend, with theories ranging from Apache raids to supernatural events. But as was often the case with frontier histories, the truth was likely more mundane and far more tragic. "Do people still come out here?" I asked, squinting against the glare. Miguel shook his head. "Not many. Some teenagers looking for thrills, the occasional historian. The land's been federal property since the 1930s. They say it's haunted." I smiled at that. In my 15 years as a journalist, I'd heard countless ghost stories. They were almost always born from unresolved human tragedies. "The path is rough," Miguel continued, "and there are rattlesnakes. Stay close." We started walking, the parched ground crunching beneath our boots. The air was still, carrying only the occasional cry of a distant hawk. Miguel walked with the confidence of someone who knew this landscape intimately, occasionally pausing to point out a prickly pear or a darting lizard. "My grandfather used to tell stories about the Navarros," he said after we'd walked in silence for a while. "Said they came here with dreams of striking at rich gold or silver. But the desert doesn't give up its treasures easily." "What do you think happened to them?" I asked. Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Out here? Could have been anything. Dehydration, disease, bandits. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes." We crested a small rise. And suddenly I could see it, a depression in the earth, the remains of what had once been a dugout home carved into the side of a hill. A few weathered wooden beams protruded from the ground like broken bones. "There it is," Miguel said. "Home sweet home for the Navarros." As we approached, I felt an inexplicable heaviness in the air. The temperature seemed to drop slightly despite the merciless sun overhead. "Most of it collapsed decades ago," Miguel explained. "But you can still see where they lived." I took out my camera and began snapping photos. The dugout had been partially excavated in the 1950s by a university team, but they'd found little of significance, just some rusted tools, broken pottery, and a child's doll. No bodies, no signs of violence, no explanation for what had become of the family. "We should go inside what's left," I said, approaching the dark opening in the hillside. Miguel hesitated. "We have maybe 4 hours of daylight left. We should start heading back by 3. I nodded, turning on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small earthen chamber. The air inside was stale and carried the faint scent of decay, despite the passage of time. "Watch your head," Miguel warned as we ducked inside. What struck me immediately was how small the space was, perhaps 20 feet square. 12 people had lived here in these cramped, dark quarters. I tried to imagine it. The heat, the lack of privacy, the constant struggle for water and food. "Look," Miguel said, pointing to a wall where faint marks were still visible. Tally marks. Maybe they were counting days. I photographed them carefully. There were hundreds, possibly representing the entire time the family had been here. The last few rows seemed to have been made with a shakier hand. "What's that?" I asked, gesturing toward a dark recess in the corner. Miguel shone his light. "That's the root cellar. They would have stored food there." I moved toward it, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The entrance was small. I would have to crawl to get through. "I wouldn't," Miguel said, his voice tense. "That part's not stable." But I was already on my hands and knees, peering into the darkness. My light caught something that made my heart skip, a small leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age, wedged between 2 stones. "I think I found something," I said, reaching for it. As my fingers touched the book, a cold draft seemed to rush past me from deeper within the cellar, carrying with it a whisper so faint I almost missed it. "Ayudanos. Help us." My hands trembled as I carefully opened the journal back at the motel. Miguel had insisted we leave before sunset, and I hadn't argued. Something about the dugout, that whisper, that cold draft, had unnerved me more than I cared to admit. The journal's leather cover was cracked and stained, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. The handwriting was neat but hurried, written in Spanish. Fortunately, my college Spanish was decent enough for a rough translation. "What does it say?" Miguel asked, leaning forward in his chair. He'd agreed to come to my room to help translate, his curiosity apparently overcoming his earlier unease. I carefully turned to the first entry, dated April 12, 1882. The children are hungry again. Rodrigo returned from town empty-handed. The bank has denied our loan once more. We have enough food for perhaps 3 days if we ration carefully. Elena's cough worsens. The little ones do not understand why we cannot return to California. I looked up at Miguel. It's Maria Navarro's journal. The mother, he nodded, a shadow passing over his face. So they were struggling. I continued reading aloud, translating as best I could. April 15, 1882. A strange man came to our home today. Anglo, well-dressed, called himself Mr. Whitaker. He knew of our troubles, offered money in exchange for Rodrigo's labor at his mine. Rodrigo was hesitant. The mine is 2 days' journey from here, but we have little choice. He leaves tomorrow. The next entries detailed the family's daily struggles, the children's hunger, Maria's attempts to grow vegetables in the unforgiving soil, her worry for her husband. Then, nearly 2 weeks later, April 27, 1882, Rodrigo has returned with food and money. Praise God. The children smiled for the first time in weeks. But Rodrigo seems changed, quieter. He speaks little of the mine, says only that the work is hard, but the pay is fair. He must return in 3 days. I flipped through more pages, scanning entries about the harsh desert summer, the children's health, and Maria's growing unease about her husband's trips to the mysterious mine. May 18, 1882. Rodrigo returned today with more money than before. When I asked how this was possible, he would not meet my eyes. He has a new watch silver, with engravings. Says Mr. Whitaker gave it to him as a bonus. I do not believe him. Tonight I saw him bury something behind the dugout. When I asked what it was, he struck me for the first time in our marriage. Miguel's expression darkened. This doesn't sound good. I nodded, continuing to read. June 2, 1882. The children and I followed Rodrigo today. He did not go west toward the mountains where he claimed the mine was. Instead, he traveled north, to the old ghost town of Perdition. We dared not follow closer. What is my husband involved in? The next several entries describe Rodrigo's increasingly erratic behavior, returning home with unexplained injuries, disappearing for days longer than planned, bringing home luxury items they could never afford on a miner's wages. Then I reached an entry that made my blood run cold. July 15, 1882. I found blood on Rodrigo's clothes today. So much blood. When I confronted him, he locked me in the root cellar for hours. The children were terrified. When he finally let me out, he swore it was animal blood that he had hunted on his journey home. But I have been a rancher's daughter and a butcher's wife. I know the difference. Miguel stood up abruptly, walking to the window. I don't like this. There's more, I said, turning the page. August 3, 1882. Mr. Whitaker came to our home today while Rodrigo was away. He asked strange questions about our family, seemed particularly interested in the children. He left a silver coin for each of them. I tried to return the money, but he insisted. Said they would serve him well. His smile never reached his eyes. The entries grew more frantic after that. Maria described strange noises at night, the children having identical nightmares, and her fear that they were being watched. The final entry was dated August 21, 1882. They are coming tonight. Rodrigo confessed everything, the robberies, the murders. Whitaker's not a mine owner. He leads a group of men who call themselves the Covenant. They have done terrible things, killed many, and Rodrigo helped them. Now they are coming for us because Rodrigo wants to leave. He says they will never let him go, that they need blood. Always more blood. I am hiding this journal in the cellar. If someone finds it, the entry ended abruptly. I looked up at Miguel, whose face had gone pale. That's it? He asked. I nodded, carefully closing the journal. That's all she wrote. Or all that's preserved anyway. Miguel crossed himself. So it wasn't Apache raids or dehydration. They were killed because of whatever Rodrigo got mixed up in. It seems that way, I agreed. But who were the Covenant? And what happened to the bodies? 12 people don't just disappear. Miguel shook his head. I don't know. But tomorrow we should go to the County Historical Society. They might have records about this Whitaker person or this group. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. If Maria's account was true, then the Navarro family had been murdered, their disappearance deliberately covered up. And somewhere in this desert there might be evidence graves. Perhaps that could finally solve the mystery. There's something else, I said, remembering. That whisper I heard in the dugout. Ayudanos, help us. Miguel looked at me for a long moment. Maybe it was just the wind, but we both knew the air had been still that day. And we both knew that some stories once started demand to be finished no matter how dark the ending might be. The ghost town of Perdition wasn't on any modern maps. It had existed for barely 15 years in the late 19th century, a silver mining boomtown that had dried up when the vein played out. According to the County Historical Society, it had been abandoned by 1890, its buildings either dismantled for materials or left to rot in the desert sun. "Are you sure this is necessary?" Miguel asked as we bumped along a barely visible trail in his weathered pickup truck the next morning. "The place has been gone for over a century." I clutched Maria's journal in my lap. The Historical Society had records of a Theodore Whitaker who owned property in Perdition. He disappeared around the same time as the Navarros. And look at this. I showed him the photocopy I'd made from a fragile newspaper clipping dated 1883, Mysterious Deaths Plague Desert Town. The article mentioned 5 men found dead over the course of a year, all with strange symbols carved into their chests. The reporter speculated about ritual killings and pagan practices. The last victim had been found just weeks before the Navarro family's disappearance. "This goes beyond one family," I said. "Something terrible was happening in this region, and I think the answer lies in what's left of Perdition." Miguel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "My grandfather used to say that some places are bad ground, that violence seeps into the soil like blood, and it never really goes away." The terrain grew rougher as we approached the coordinates where Perdition should have been. Cacti gave way to scraggly mesquite trees, and the land began to rise. Finally, Miguel stopped the truck at the base of a rocky hill. "We'll have to walk from here," he said. "It should be just over that ridge." We gathered our supplies, water, cameras, flashlights. Sand began to climb. The hill wasn't tall, but the loose scree made the going treacherous. By the time we reached the top, sweat soaked my shirt despite the early hour. There, Miguel pointed down into a small valley on the other side. Perdition wasn't completely gone after all. The skeletal remains of a dozen buildings stood in a rough semicircle around what must have been the main street. Most were just foundations or partial walls, but a few structures remained somewhat intact, including a 2-story building with a sagging balcony that must have been the town's hotel. "It's bigger than I expected," I said, taking out my camera to document the ruins. "Silver was good business," Miguel replied. For a while anyway, we descended carefully into the ghost town. Up close, the ruins were even more eerie, windows gaping like empty eye sockets, doors hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Nature had begun to reclaim the site. Desert plants grew through floorboards, and a rattlesnake slithered away as we approached the remains of what might have been a general store. "According to the property records, Whitaker's place should be at the north end of town," I said, consulting my notes. "A large house set apart from the others." We picked our way through the ruins, alert for snakes and unstable structures. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground and the occasional cry of a distant bird. At the northern edge of town, a path led up a slight incline. Following it, we came upon the foundation of what had indeed been a substantial house. Unlike the other buildings, very little of this one remained standing, just a chimney and fragments of stone walls. "It burned," Miguel observed, pointing to the scorched stones and blackened soil still visible after all these years. I took several photos, then began to explore the perimeter. The house had been built on a natural terrace overlooking the town, affording what would have been an excellent view of anyone approaching. "Look at this," Miguel called from the eastern side of the ruins. I joined him to find a set of stone steps leading down from the terrace into what appeared to be a root cellar or basement. The entrance was partially collapsed, but there was enough space for a person to squeeze through. "Should we?" Miguel asked, clearly reluctant. I hesitated. The dark openings seemed to exhale a breath of stale, cold air that raised goosebumps on my arms despite the heat, but I hadn't come this far to turn back. "I'll go first," I said, switching on my flashlight. "If it looks unstable, we'll leave immediately." The passage was tight but navigable. I descended carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. Miguel followed close behind, his breathing quick and shallow. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a large underground room with a packed earth floor. My flashlight beam revealed walls of fitted stone and a ceiling supported by heavy wooden beams that had somehow survived the fire above. "It's some kind of cellar," I said, sweeping my light across the space. But as the beam traveled the room's perimeter, I realized this was no ordinary storage area. The walls were covered with strange symbols painted or carved into the stone spirals, eyes and shapes that resembled distorted human figures. In the center of the room stood a large stone table or altar, its surface stained a dark brown that made my stomach turn. "Dios mío," Miguel whispered. "What is this place?" I moved closer to the altar, my journalist's instincts temporarily overriding my growing sense of dread. The stains were old, ancient, but unmistakable. This was blood. A lot of blood. Around the base of the altar, the earth had been disturbed relatively recently, perhaps by animals or the occasional intrepid explorer. Something pale gleamed in the disturbed soil. I knelt down, brushing away dirt to reveal a small bone. Human? Miguel asked, his voice tight. I think so, I replied, photographing it carefully without touching it further. A finger bone, maybe. We continued our exploration of the chamber, documenting the strange symbols and taking soil samples near the altar. In one corner, we found a small alcove that had been sealed with stones recently, judging by the lack of dust on the mortar. Someone's been here, I said. Someone who knows about this place. Miguel looked around nervously. We should go. Report this to the authorities. I nodded, but my attention was caught by something carved into the wall near the alcove. Not a symbol this time, but words in Spanish. La alianza nunca muere. The covenant never dies, I translated aloud. A sudden noise from above made us both jump, a scraping sound like footsteps on stone. Hello? I called out, immediately regretting it. Silence answered, heavy and expectant. Then, unmistakably, another footstep. We need to leave, Miguel whispered. Now. We moved quickly toward the stairs, our flashlight beams dancing wildly across the chamber. Just as we reached the bottom step, my light caught a shadow moving at the top of the stairs, a human silhouette backlit by the desert sun. Who's there? I called, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure remained motionless for a moment, then spoke in a voice as dry as the desert itself. You shouldn't have come here. Sheriff's Department, don't move. The silhouette raised what appeared to be a badge. Relief washed over me so suddenly I nearly stumbled. Law enforcement, not some descendant of a murderous cult. Miguel's shoulders sagged beside me. The figure descended the stairs, revealing a woman in her 50s wearing the tan uniform of the county sheriff's office. Her silver badge caught the light from our flashlights, and her hand rested casually on her holstered sidearm. Deputy Sheriff Karen Vasquez, she introduced herself. Mind telling me what you two are doing trespassing on federal land? I explained that I was a journalist researching the Navarro disappearance, showing her my press credentials. Miguel added that he was my guide, legally permitted to escort visitors in certain areas of federal land. The deputy's weathered face remained impassive. And you thought the best research method was to break into an unstable structure in a ghost town? We found something, I said, gesturing toward the altar. I think this place is connected to multiple unsolved deaths from the 1880s, including the Navarro family. Deputy Vasquez's expression flickered briefly. Show me. I led her to the altar, explaining about Maria Navarro's journal, Theodore Whitaker, and the newspaper accounts of ritual killings. As I spoke, the deputy surveyed the chamber with a practiced eye, her flashlight lingering on the disturbed earth where I'd found the bone. This isn't the first time people have come out here looking for the Navarros, she said finally. We get thrill seekers, amateur historians, even paranormal investigators. But most don't find this place. Do you know what it is? I asked. She hesitated. There are stories in the department. Old cases that never got solved. She knelt by the altar, examining the stains without touching them. When I was a rookie, my training officer told me about a group that operated in this county in the late 1800s, called themselves the Covenant, supposedly involved in everything from robbery to ritual murder. I exchanged glances with Miguel. That's the same group mentioned in Maria Navarro's journal. Deputy Vasquez nodded. The old-timers in the department treated it like a ghost story. Something to scare the new deputies with. But there were files records that went back to the 1880s, cases that were never closed. Were? I asked, catching her use of past tense. There was a fire at the county records building in 1978. A lot of the oldest files were lost. She straightened up. Convenient, isn't it? The implication hung in the air between us. I thought about the recently mortared alcove, the words carved into the wall. You think the Covenant still exists? I said. It wasn't a question. Deputy Vasquez's face hardened. I think we need to get out of here and call this in. That's a human bone you found, which makes this a potential crime scene. We followed her up the stairs into the harsh sunlight. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed her patrol vehicle parked beyond the ruins of Whitaker's house. How did you know we were here? Miguel asked suddenly. Quote, the deputy didn't answer immediately, instead leading us away from the cellar entrance. Let's get over to my vehicle. I need to radio this in. A sense of unease began to creep up my spine. Deputy Vasquez? How did you find us? She stopped walking, her back to us. We've had motion sensors out here for years. Too many people getting hurt exploring these ruins. When one gets triggered, the closest deputy responds. It sounded reasonable enough, but something in her tone rang false. I glanced at Miguel, who looked equally unconvinced. I need to get some equipment from my vehicle, the deputy continued. You two wait here. As she walked toward her patrol car, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small silver pendant hanging from her belt, partially hidden by her uniform shirt. Just visible was what looked like an eye surrounded by a spiral identical to one of the symbols we'd seen on the chamber walls. "Miguel," I whispered. "We need to go. Now." He nodded almost imperceptibly. We began backing away slowly, trying to stay behind the crumbling walls of the house for cover. The deputy reached her vehicle and opened the trunk. When she turned back toward us, she was holding not equipment but a shotgun. "Run!" Miguel shouted, grabbing my arm. We sprinted back toward the ruins of the town, ducking behind walls and debris as the first shotgun blast echoed across the valley. Pellets sprayed the stone beside us, sending fragments flying. "This way." Miguel pulled me toward a partially intact building, the old hotel. We crashed through the hanging door, finding ourselves in a dusty, debris-strewn lobby. Ancient furniture lay scattered and broken around the room. "Upstairs," I gasped, pointing to a sagging staircase. "Too dangerous," Miguel countered. "It won't hold our weight. The back. There must be a back exit." We hurried through a doorway into what had once been a kitchen. Sunlight streamed through a collapsed section of the rear wall, our escape route. But just as we reached it, the lobby door crashed open behind us. "It won't help you to run," Deputy Vasquez called, her voice eerily calm. "The Covenant has protected this land for generations. No one who learns our secrets leaves alive." I grabbed a rusted iron pan from the debris and handed it to Miguel, taking a broken chair leg for myself. "Not much against a shotgun, but better than nothing." "She has to reload after 2 shots, I whispered. "That's our chance." Miguel nodded grimly. We pressed ourselves against the wall on either side of the doorway, listening to the deputy's slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the lobby. The Navarros weren't the first, her voice drifted to us. And they weren't the last. The old ways require sacrifice. Blood keeps the desert fertile. The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen doorway. I held my breath, gripping the chair leg so tightly my knuckles whitened. Mr. Whitaker understood this. He served faithfully until his time came, as did his successor and hers and all who followed. The shotgun barrel appeared in the doorway, sweeping slowly from side to side, including my grandfather and my father, and now me. The moment the barrel passed me, I swung the chair leg with all my strength, connecting with the deputy's arms. The shotgun discharged into the floor as Miguel lunged from the other side with the iron pan striking her shoulder. The deputy stumbled backward, momentarily off balance but still holding the shotgun. I tackled her before she could recover, sending us both crashing into the remains of a table. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, but I managed to maintain my grip on her gun arm. "Miguel!" "The gun!" I gasped. He was there in an instant, wrenching the shotgun from the deputy's grasp. She fought with surprising strength, landing a solid punch to my ribs that made me cry out in pain. "You don't understand," she snarled, her face transformed with rage. "The sacrifices keep the balance. Without them, there would be drought, famine, death, for everyone in this valley." I rolled away from her, scrambling to my feet. "You're insane." Miguel had the shotgun now, pointed squarely at the deputy. His hands were shaking, but his grip was firm. "We're leaving," he said. "Don't follow us." Deputy Vasquez slowly got to her feet, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Her eyes burned with a fanaticism that chilled me to the core. "You think you're the first to discover the chamber? To threaten exposure?" She laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "The Covenant has friends in the county, in the state capital. People who understand the necessity of the old ways. We have the journal," I countered. "And photographs. Evidence." "Evidence of what? A crazy cult from the 1880s? Ancient bloodstains? A bone that could be animal for all you know?" She took a step toward us, seemingly unconcerned about the shotgun. "By the time you reach civilization, the journal will be gone from your motel room, the photos erased from your camera. And if you persist," she smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the shadowy room, "well, the desert is vast and bodies are rarely found." Miguel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay back." For a tense moment, I thought he might actually shoot her. Part of me wanted him to, but Miguel wasn't a killer. "We're going," I said, backing toward the exit and pulling him with me. "Keep the gun on her." We edged through the collapsed wall into the blinding sunlight, the deputy watching us with that terrible smile. Once outside, we ran past the ruins, up the ridge, not stopping until we reached Miguel's truck. "She'll come after us," Miguel said as we sped away, the ghost town diminishing in the rearview mirror. I nodded, wincing at the pain in my ribs. "We need to get to the state police. Someone outside the county." But as the adrenaline began to fade, doubt crept in. The deputy's words echoed in my mind. Would anyone believe us? A century-old cult, a corrupt local government, ritual sacrifices in the desert? It sounded insane even to me, and I'd seen the chamber with my own eyes. The journal, I said suddenly. We need to get back to the motel. Miguel pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck bouncing violently over the rough terrain. What if she was telling the truth? What if they've already taken it? I didn't answer. I couldn't bear to consider that possibility, that our only concrete evidence might already be gone, that we might be next on the Covenant's list of sacrifices. As the desert blurred past the windows, one thought circled endlessly in my mind. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. But it was too late for that now. We had disturbed something ancient and malevolent, and it would not rest until the silence was restored. The question was, would we be alive to tell the story? The sun was beginning its descent as we pulled into the parking lot of the Desert Vista Motel. The place looked different somehow, more ominous. The faded pastel paint and buzzing neon sign no longer quaint but sinister in the late afternoon light. "I'll go in first," Miguel said, the shotgun concealed beneath a blanket in the back seat. "Check if anyone's there." I nodded, scanning the parking lot. Only 3 other vehicles were present: an old Buick that had been there since our arrival, a dusty pickup truck I didn't recognize, and my heart skipped, a county sheriff's patrol car. "Miguel," I whispered, pointing, "that's not her car. It's a different unit number," he cursed under his breath. "They're already here." We sat in silence for a moment, considering our options. We could drive to the next county, try to find state police. But without the journal as evidence, who would believe us? "We need that journal," I said finally. "It's the only proof we have." Miguel looked at me, his expression grim but resolute. "I have an idea. Give me your room key." I handed it over, and he explained his plan. It was risky, but it might work. 10 minutes later, we put it into action. Miguel approached the motel office while I slipped around to the back, keeping to the shadows. Through a window, I could see the motel manager, heavy-set man named Frank, talking to a uniformed sheriff's deputy. From this angle, I couldn't see the deputy's face, but the body language was tense. Miguel entered the office, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully. I used the distraction to hurry past the window to the row of rooms. Mine was the third door. I pressed myself against the wall beside it, listening. No sounds came from within. I was about to use my spare key when I noticed the door was already slightly ajar. Someone had been here, or still was. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room had been searched thoroughly. The mattress was askew, the drawers pulled out, my clothes strewn across the floor. But the intruder was gone. Working quickly, I went to the air conditioning unit. Before leaving for perdition, I'd taped Maria's journal to the back of it, a paranoid precaution that now seemed prescient. To my immense relief, it was still there, untouched. I tucked the journal into my waistband, covering it with my shirt, then took a moment to assess the situation. My laptop was open on the desk, still powered on. The screen showed my photo folder, now empty. As Deputy Vasquez had predicted, all my evidence was gone except for the journal. Just as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps approaching outside. I darted into the bathroom, leaving the door cracked open just enough to see the main room. The sheriff's deputy entered, closing the door behind him. He was young, probably mid-20s, with a buzz cut and the overly confident posture of someone new to authority. "Miss Reeves?" he called, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Sheriff's Department." "Are you here?" I held my breath, watching as he surveyed the already searched room with confusion. He touched his radio. "Unit 14 to dispatch. No sign of Reeves at the motel. Room's been tossed, though." He paused, listening to a response I couldn't hear. "Roger that. I'll check the surrounding area." As he turned to leave, the journal shifted against my waistband, the leather corner peeking out from under my shirt. I adjusted it quickly, but the movement caught the deputy's eye. He spun toward the bathroom door, drawing his weapon. "Sheriff's Department, come out with your hands up," my mind raced. If I surrendered, I'd lose the journal and probably my life. If I resisted, I could be shot. Neither option was acceptable. Before I could decide, the motel room door burst open. Miguel stood there, wielding a fire extinguisher. Without hesitation, he discharged it full in the deputy's face, filling the room with chemical fog. The deputy fired blindly, the shot going wide. I launched myself from the bathroom, tackling him around the knees. We crashed to the floor together, his gun skittering under the bed. Miguel was there in an instant, the emptied extinguisher raised like a club. The deputy raised his hands in surrender, coughing violently from the chemicals. "Who are you?" I demanded, pinning his arms. "Are you with the Covenant?" Confusion flashed across his face. "The what?" "I'm Deputy Reynolds, County Sheriff's Office." "You're trespassing on federal land, and save it," Miguel cut him off. "We know about the Covenant, about what happened to the Navarros." The young deputy's confusion appeared genuine. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. I was just told to find a journalist who might have information about a suspected grave robbery." I studied his face. looking for deception, but finding only bewilderment and fear. You don't know about Deputy Vasquez? About what happened at Perdition? He shook his head. Vasquez? Karen Vasquez? She's been on leave for 3 weeks. Family emergency. Miguel and I exchanged glances. If he was telling the truth, then who was the woman at Perdition? And if Vasquez was really on leave, how had she known to find us there? We need to restrain him, I said to Miguel, not taking my eyes off the deputy. Using the cord from the motel phone, we bound the deputy's hands and feet, then gagged him with a washcloth. I felt terrible if he was innocent. We were committing a serious crime, but we couldn't take chances. What now? Miguel asked as we stepped outside, closing the door on the trussed-up deputy. We need to get to the sheriff's office, I decided. Find out if the real Vasquez is really on leave. And we need to make copies of the journal digital backups that can't be easily destroyed. Miguel nodded. I know someone in Santa Cruz who can help us, a professor of Spanish colonial history. If anyone can authenticate the journal, it's him. We hurried back to Miguel's truck. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I looked back at the motel one last time. The neon sign flickered ominously in the gathering dusk, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows beside the office, a woman in a sheriff's uniform watching us leave. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. Drive faster, I told Miguel, clutching the journal to my chest. I don't think we have much time. Professor Alejandro Morales lived in a modest craftsman house near the university campus in Santa Cruz, its shelves overflowing with books and artifacts from a lifetime of historical research. We arrived just after midnight, having driven straight through from the desert, stopping only for gas and to make a rushed phone call to the professor from a payphone. You look like you've been through hell, Morales observed as he ushered us inside, his silver hair disheveled from being woken at such an hour. Despite being in his 70s, his eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Something like that, I said, gratefully accepting the cup of strong coffee he offered. Miguel and I took turns explaining what had happened, the journal, the dugout, the chamber beneath Whitaker's house, and our encounter with the woman claiming to be Deputy Vasquez. When we finished, Morales was silent for a long moment, his weathered face grave. May I see the journal? He asked finally. I handed it over, watching anxiously as he examined it with expert hands. He checked the binding, the paper quality, the ink, murmuring to himself in Spanish. It appears authentic, he concluded. The materials and techniques are consistent with the period. But to be certain, I would need to perform more tests. We don't have time for that, Miguel said. We need to make copies now before they find us. Morales nodded, leading us to his study where a computer and scanner stood amidst piles of books. We'll create digital copies and upload them to several secure servers, and I'll photograph each page with my digital camera as backup. While the professor worked, Miguel kept watch at the windows. I paced the room, the adrenaline that had kept me going now giving way to exhaustion and pain from my earlier confrontation with the false deputy. You said this woman knew you were at Perdition, Morales said as he carefully scanned each page. How would she know that? She claimed there were motion sensors, I replied. But I think someone at the motel must have told her. The manager, Frank, seemed friendly with the local deputies, Morales hummed thoughtfully. And this symbol you saw on her belt, an eye within a spiral? I nodded. It matched one of the symbols in the chamber. That's interesting, Morales said, adjusting his glasses. I've seen similar iconography before in my research on Spanish colonial secret societies. They often incorporated indigenous symbols with European occult traditions. You think the covenant predates the Navarros? Goes back to colonial times? Miguel asked from his position by the window. It's possible, Morales replied. The Spanish brought the Inquisition to the New World, but they also brought heterodox traditions, alchemists, hermeticists, practitioners of various esoteric arts. Some formed secret societies to avoid persecution. But this wasn't about alchemy, I pointed out. Maria's journal described murders, blood rituals. Morales nodded grimly. Some of these groups believed in blood sacrifice as a means to gain power or ensure prosperity. It was a perversion of both Catholic and indigenous beliefs. The scanner hummed steadily as we talked, preserving Maria Navarro's desperate final entries. When it finished, Morales copied the files to multiple flash drives and began uploading them to secure servers. Now, he said, turning to face us fully, we need to decide what to do next. If what you've told me is true, going to the local authorities could be dangerous. You can't be sure who's involved with this covenant. We tied up a deputy, Miguel reminded us. By now, they'll have the whole department looking for us. We need to go higher, I said. FBI, maybe. This crosses into potential federal crimes, kidnapping, murder, conspiracy. Morales stroked his chin thoughtfully. I have a former student who works for the Arizona Attorney General's office. She could advise us on how to proceed safely. As he reached for his phone, a sharp crack echoed through the house, the sound of breaking glass from the back of the building. Miguel moved instantly, pulling me away from the windows. They found us. Morales grabbed the flash drives and thrust them into my hands. Take these. Go out the front. My car keys are in the bowl by the door. What about you? I asked. I'll delay them. He pulled open a desk drawer, removing an old revolver. Go. Now, Miguel pulled me toward the hallway, but I hesitated. The journal, leave it, Morales urged. They're looking for the original. Let them find it while you escape with the copies. Another crash sounded, closer this time, followed by heavy footsteps. Miguel and I ran down the hallway to the front door. As Miguel grabbed the car keys, I glanced back to see Morales standing at the entrance to his study, revolver raised. Professor, come with us. He shook his head. Too slow. I'd only hinder you. Go. And we burst out the front door into the cool coastal night. Morales' ancient Volvo sat in the driveway. We piled in, Miguel fumbling with the unfamiliar keys. From inside the house came the deafening report of a gunshot, then another. I moved to go back, but Miguel caught my arm. We can't help him now, he said, his voice breaking. We have to go. The engine roared to life. As we backed out of the driveway, I saw shadows moving behind the house's windows. One shadow raised what looked like a gun. Down! Miguel shouted as the rear window exploded in a shower of glass. He floored the accelerator and we tore away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of a figure emerging from the house, a woman in a sheriff's uniform. Her face contorted with rage. The same woman from Perdition. It's her, I gasped. How did she find us? Miguel didn't answer, focused on navigating the residential streets at dangerous speed. Behind us, a vehicle's headlights flared to life, beginning pursuit. Where are we going? I asked, clutching the flash drives like talismans. Airport, Miguel replied tersely. San Jose. It's closest. I checked my watch, nearly 2 a.m. Will there even be flights? First ones leave around 5 a.m. If we can make it there. Lose ourselves in the crowd, ... double quotes. He left the sentence unfinished. The pursuing vehicle was gaining on us, the headlights growing larger in the rearview mirror. Miguel took a sharp turn onto a busier street, narrowly missing a delivery truck. The copies, I realized suddenly. The ones the professor uploaded. We need the passwords to access them. Miguel swore, swerving to avoid another car. We'll have to figure that out later. Right now, we just need to survive. The chase continued through the sleeping city, our aging Volvo no match for the powerful vehicle behind us. As we approached the freeway on-ramp, Miguel made a sudden decision, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic to take an exit we'd nearly passed. The maneuver bought us precious seconds, but not enough. As we sped down a service road parallel to the freeway, the headlights reappeared behind us. There, Miguel pointed ahead to a 24-hour truck stop, its parking lot filled with semis. We can lose them there, maybe find another vehicle. He pulled into the lot, cutting his headlights and weaving between the parked trucks. We abandoned the Volvo between 2 massive semis and continued on foot, crouching low and moving quickly through the shadows. Behind us, I heard car doors slam and voices calling out orders. They were organizing a search. This way, Miguel whispered, leading me toward the truck stop's bustling diner. We slipped inside, finding ourselves in a brightly lit space filled with tired-looking truckers nursing coffee and early breakfasts. Miguel guided me to a booth in the back corner where we sat with our backs to the door. What now? I whispered, aware that we were trapped. Miguel's eyes darted around the diner, settling on a grizzled trucker preparing to leave. I have an idea. Give me one of the flash drives. I handed him the smallest one. He approached the trucker, speaking too quietly for me to hear. Money changed hands, Miguel emptying his wallet, and then the trucker nodded, pocketing the flash drive. They shook hands and the trucker left. What was that about? I asked when Miguel returned. Insurance, he replied. He's headed to Chicago. Promised to mail the drive to my cousin there if he doesn't hear from me in 3 days. Before I could respond, the diner's door swung open. The woman from Perdition entered, now dressed in civilian clothes but unmistakable nonetheless. Her eyes scanned the room methodically. Bathroom, Miguel hissed. Now. We slipped out of the booth and through a door marked restrooms just as her gaze reached our corner. The hallway led to men's and women's facilities, but also to a service exit with a glowing red sign. Miguel pushed the exit bar and we emerged into the pre-dawn chill behind the building. A loading dock extended from the back of the truck stop where a delivery was in progress. Workers unloaded boxes from a refrigerated truck, too busy to notice us. The truck, Miguel said. It'll be heading back empty. We circled around, waiting for a moment when the workers were inside. Then we dashed to the truck's rear, finding the rolling door partially open. Miguel boosted me up and I scrambled inside, then helped pull him up after me. We huddled among leftover boxes and packing materials, scarcely daring to breathe as footsteps approached. The workers returned, and one pulled the rolling door shut with a bang, plunging us into darkness. Minutes later, the engine rumbled to life, and the truck began to move. "Where do you think it's going?" I whispered. "Away from here," Miguel replied, his voice tight with exhaustion. "And right now, that's all that matters." In the darkness of the refrigerated compartment, with the rumble of the road beneath us, I clutched the remaining flash drives. Professor Morales had likely died to help us preserve Maria Navarro's final testament. I couldn't let that sacrifice be in vain. "We'll find a way," I promised, speaking as much to the ghosts of the past as to Miguel. "We'll expose them. All of them." But as the truck carried us into uncertainty, I wondered if some secrets were simply too dangerous to uncover, if some mysteries were better left buried in the desert sand. The refrigerated truck took us north, away from Santa Cruz and hopefully away from the Covenant. We huddled among empty produce crates for hours, the cold seeping into our bones despite sharing Miguel's jacket. When the truck finally stopped, we risked peeking through a small window in the rolling door. We were at a distribution center somewhere in the Central Valley, judging by the vast agricultural fields visible beyond the loading docks. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "We need to move before they open the truck," Miguel whispered. We slipped out while the driver was checking in at a security booth, ducking behind parked vehicles until we reached the perimeter fence. A tier in the chain link provided our exit, and soon we were walking along a rural highway, thumbs out whenever a vehicle approached. An older couple in a camper van eventually stopped, offering us a ride to Sacramento. They were retirees on their way to visit grandchildren, too occupied with their own stories to question our disheveled appearance or vague explanations about car trouble. In Sacramento, we used the last of my emergency cash to buy burner phones from a convenience store. Our first call was to the Arizona Attorney General's office, asking for Morales' former student, Lydia Ortiz. After being transferred multiple times and nearly hanging up in frustration, we finally heard a cautious female voice. "This is Ortiz." I explained who we were and how we got her name, careful to keep details vague on an unsecured line. "Professor Morales was my mentor," she said after a long pause. "I haven't spoken to him in months." "You say he's hurt?" "We think so," I replied, my throat tight. "We need help, Ms. Ortiz. We have evidence of serious crimes, but we can't go to local authorities." Another pause. "Where are you now?" "Sacramento." "Stay there. Find somewhere public but not too busy. Text this number your exact location. I'll have someone come to you." 4 hours later, we sat in a quiet corner of the California State Railroad Museum, jumping at every visitor who entered. Just when I was beginning to think we'd been abandoned, a man in a neatly pressed suit approached our bench. "Ms. Reeves?" "Mr. Vega?" He showed us a Department of Justice badge. "Agent Calloway. Ms. Ortiz sent me." He escorted us to an unmarked sedan parked outside, checked thoroughly for followers, then drove us to a federal building downtown. Inside, we were led to a secure conference room where a woman waited, mid-30s, sharp eyes, hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Lydia Ortiz," she introduced herself, shaking our hands firmly. "Special Prosecutor's Office, Arizona AG. Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." For the next 2 hours, we recounted our story. The journal, perdition, the chamber, the false Deputy Vasquez, Professor Morales. We showed her the flash drives containing the scanned journal pages. Ortiz listened without interruption, her expression giving away nothing. When we finished, she leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "What you're describing," she said finally, "lines up with some cold cases we've been reviewing. Disappearances along the Arizona-California border going back decades. Most were dismissed as people lost in the desert, but the pattern always bothered some of our investigators." "You believe us?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Let's say I'm interested," she replied carefully. "But what you've brought me is thin. A journal that may or may not be authentic. Second-hand accounts of a hidden chamber. No bodies, no concrete evidence of contemporary crimes. People tried to kill us," Miguel pointed out. "That's pretty concrete. And you assaulted a sheriff's deputy and fled the scene," Ortiz countered. "From their perspective, you're suspects who resisted arrest." My heart sank. "So you can't help us?" Ortiz raised a hand. "I didn't say that. I said what you've brought me is thin. We need more. More. What more could you possibly want?" I demanded. "We nearly died getting this far. We need to find Whitaker's house again," she said. "Document the chamber properly. And we need to locate the Navarro dugout, see if there's any physical evidence left after all these years. With that, I might be able to convince my superiors to open a federal investigation." "Go back?" Miguel looked incredulous. "They're watching those places now. They know we've been there. Which is why you won't go alone," Ortiz assured us. "I can arrange a joint task force, FBI, state police, my office." People I trust from outside the county. I exchanged glances with Miguel. The thought of returning to the desert terrified me, but what choice did we have? How soon? I asked. 3 days, Ortiz replied. We need time to assemble the right team, get the necessary warrants. In the meantime, you'll be under federal protection. Agent Calloway drove us to a safe house on the outskirts of Sacramento, a nondescript suburban home with reinforced doors and windows. 2 agents were already there, setting up surveillance equipment. You'll be safe here, Calloway assured us. No one comes in or out without our knowledge. That night, despite the protection and the comfortable beds, neither Miguel nor I could sleep. We sat in the living room, sipping coffee and speaking in low voices. Do you think Morales is really dead? Miguel asked. I nodded slowly. We both heard the gunshots. And he would have contacted us if he could. Miguel was quiet for a moment. And what about this task force? Do you trust Ortiz? I don't know, I admitted. But what other options do we have? The next 2 days passed in anxious monotony. We reviewed the journal scans repeatedly, searching for any details we might have missed. Ortiz called with updates on the task force, 12 people including forensic specialists. 4 vehicles, satellite communications to avoid depending on local networks. On the morning of the 3rd day, Agent Calloway received a call. His expression darkened as he listened. Change of plans, he told us, holstering his weapon. We're moving you now. What happened? I asked, alarm spreading through my chest. Professor Morales' house burned to the ground last night. His body was found in the ruins. Calloway's voice was grim. And early this morning, 2 FBI agents involved in the task force planning were involved in a car accident. 1 dead, 1 critical. Miguel cursed softly. They found out about the task force. How? I demanded. How could they possibly know? Calloway shook his head. That's what we need to figure out. But right now we need to get you to a more secure location. We packed quickly, leaving within minutes. Instead of Calloway's sedan, we took an SUV with tinted windows driving north toward Oregon. Calloway explained that we were being taken to a federal facility near the border where we would meet Ortiz and what remained of the task force. We had been driving for about an hour when Miguel, staring out the rear window, suddenly tensed. The black pickup, he said quietly. It's been behind us since we left Sacramento. Calloway checked the rearview mirror. Good eye. Let's see if they're really following us. He took the next exit. Then another, winding through a small town before returning to the highway. The pickup followed every turn. Okay, Calloway said, his voice tight. New plan. He accelerated, pushing the SUV well above the speed limit. The pickup kept pace, gradually closing the distance between us. Calloway reached for his radio, calling for backup, giving our position and direction. How far to the safe house? I asked, clinging to the door handle as we swerved around slower traffic. Too far, Calloway replied grimly. We need somewhere closer. He took another exit suddenly, the tires squealing in protest. This time we found ourselves on a rural road winding through dense forest. The pickup was still behind us, now joined by a dark sedan. They're coordinating, Miguel observed, watching the vehicles maneuver to block potential escape routes. Calloway's radio crackled with a response. Backup was coming, but it would take at least 20 minutes to reach us. We didn't have 20 minutes. The road narrowed, forcing Calloway to slow down. The pickup accelerated, ramming our rear bumper. The impact sent us fishtailing, Calloway fighting to maintain control. Hang on, he shouted as the SUV plowed through a guardrail and down a steep embankment. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion, the crunch of metal, the shower of glass, the sickening sensation of falling. Then came the impact, the airbags deploying in an explosion of white, and finally, stillness. I blinked, dazed, tasting blood from where I'd bitten my tongue. Miguel was beside me, already unbuckling his seatbelt. Calloway hung limply against his airbag, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely. Is he? I began. Miguel checked for a pulse. Alive. But we need to move. Now. We dragged Calloway from the wrecked SUV, struggling up the embankment away from the road. Behind us, car doors slammed and voices called out commands. They were coming. The forest provided cover and we used it, half carrying Calloway as we pushed deeper into the trees. The agent regained consciousness after a few minutes, able to walk with support but clearly concussed. My phone, he mumbled. We need to call for help. But his phone had been destroyed in the crash and ours were in the SUV. We were on our own, lost in unfamiliar woods with unknown pursuers behind us. We kept moving, guided only by the need to put distance between ourselves and the road. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small stream and followed it downhill, reasoning that it might lead to a settlement or at least a road where we could flag down help. Hours passed. Calloway's condition worsened. He became disoriented, his speech slurred. We fashioned a rough shelter of branches and leaves where the stream widened into a small pool, deciding to rest until dawn. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill. I found myself thinking of Maria Navarro. Had she felt this same desperation as she hid her journal and waited for the covenant to come for her family? Had she known even then that some secrets were too dangerous to uncover? We should never have gone to perdition, Miguel said softly, echoing my thoughts. Some things should stay buried. I shook my head. If we hadn't gone, they would still be operating in secret, still sacrificing people, and now they'll sacrifice us, he replied, his voice hollow. I had no answer for that. In the darkness, with Calloway's labored breathing the only sound besides the gentle gurgle of the stream, I clutched the remaining flash drive in my pocket. It contained the only evidence that might bring down the covenant if we lived long enough to share it. We'll make it, I promised Miguel, reaching for his hand in the darkness. We have to. But as the night deepened around us, bringing with it the distant sound of searching voices and flashlight beams cutting through the trees, I wondered if I was making a promise I couldn't keep. Dawn broke with a gray mist hanging over the forest, turning the trees into looming shadows. Calloway's condition had deteriorated overnight, his pupils uneven, his speech nearly unintelligible. We needed to find help fast. The stream, Miguel decided, splashing cold water on his face. It has to lead somewhere. We continued downstream, supporting Calloway between us. The terrain grew steeper, the stream widening and flowing faster until it became a proper river rushing through a rocky gorge. Listen, I said, pausing. In the distance, barely audible over the water, came the rumble of an engine. We followed the sound, eventually emerging from the trees onto a dirt road that paralleled the river. A rickety wooden sign indicated we were near something called Hanson's Mill, with an arrow pointing downstream. It's validation, Miguel said with palpable relief. Maybe a phone. We had walked perhaps half a mile when we heard the vehicle and old pickup truck approaching from behind. Miguel waved it down, and the driver, an elderly man with a weathered face, stopped beside us. You folks look like you've had some trouble, he observed, eyes widening at Calloway's condition. Car accident, I explained hastily. Our friend needs medical attention. Is there a hospital nearby? The man shook his head. Nearest hospital's in Reading, 40 miles south. But my place is just up ahead, got a radio, can call for an ambulance. We accepted gratefully, helping Calloway into the truck bed while Miguel and I squeezed into the cab with the driver, who introduced himself as Earl. You're lucky I came by, Earl said as we bounced along the rutted road. Don't get much traffic on this stretch, especially this time of year. Do you live out here alone? I asked, glancing at Miguel with silent warning to be careful what we revealed. Just me and the dog these days, Earl replied. Wife passed 3 years back. Kids all moved away. I run a small fishing camp in the summer, but it's closed up now. Earl's place turned out to be a collection of weathered cabins clustered around a larger lodge building, set in a clearing overlooking the river. True to his word, he had a radio and soon was speaking with emergency services requesting an ambulance. They're sending a helicopter, he reported. Too hard to get an ambulance up here. Be about 40 minutes. He offered us coffee and sandwiches, which we accepted gratefully, and showed us to a small cabin where we could clean up. Once alone, Miguel and I spoke in hushed tones. We can't stay here, he insisted. If they found us on the highway, they could find us here. Calloway needs that helicopter, I pointed out, and we need to contact Ortiz. Let her know what happened. Miguel paced the small room. Earl seems harmless enough, but we can't trust anyone right now. I nodded, remembering Deputy Vasquez's words about the Covenant having friends everywhere. We wait for the helicopter, make sure Calloway's taken care of. Then we find a way to reach Ortiz directly. Earl knocked on the door, bringing fresh towels. His friendly demeanor had an edge of curiosity now. So what brings you folks all the way out here anyway? Not exactly tourist season, just some wildlife photography, I lied smoothly. We were hoping to get shots of eagles along the river. Earl nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Well, you're welcome to use the phone in the lodge if you need to call anyone. It's just a landline, but it works most days. After he left, Miguel caught my eye. A phone. We could call Ortiz directly. We waited until Earl was occupied with Calloway, then slipped to the lodge. The interior was rustic but comfortable stone fireplace, mounted fish on the walls, worn leather furniture. The phone sat on a counter near a small kitchenette. I dialed Ortiz's number from memory, praying she would answer. To my relief, she picked up on the third ring. Ortiz. It's Reeves, I said quickly. We were ambushed. The SUV went off the road. Calloway's hurt. She swore softly. Where are you now? I explained about Earl's fishing camp, the helicopter on the way. Ortiz listened, then her voice grew urgent. You need to move. Now. Calloway's transponder is still active. They can track it. And there's more. I've been doing some digging since you left Sacramento. The Covenant isn't just some local cult. They have connections in law enforcement across 3 states, possibly federal agencies too. My blood ran cold. How deep does this go? I don't know yet, but I've arranged new transport for you. There's a ranger station about 2 miles downriver from Hanson's Mill. Go there. Ask for Ranger Bennett. She's expecting you. What about Calloway? I'll make sure he's protected once the helicopter arrives. But you and Miguel need to be gone before then. I hung up, my mind racing. Miguel had been right. We couldn't trust anyone, not even the medical evacuation team. We returned to find Earl sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, staring out at the dirt road. He didn't seem surprised to see us emerge from the lodge. Phone work okay for you? He asked casually, his friendly tone unchanged but his eyes watchful. Yes, thank you, I replied, forcing a smile. We were able to reach our group. They were worried when we didn't check in. Earl nodded slowly. Funny thing about wildlife photographers. They usually have cameras. My smile froze. Miguel tensed beside me. Might want to check on your friend, Earl said, gesturing toward the cabin where we'd left Calloway. He's been asking for you. We backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact with Earl until we reached the cabin door. Inside, Calloway was semi-conscious on the cot where we'd left him. Something's wrong, Miguel whispered. He knows. I nodded. Ortiz says Calloway's being tracked. We need to get to the ranger station downriver. What about him? Miguel nodded toward Calloway. Ortiz will send protection with the helicopter, but we need to be gone before it arrives. We gathered what few belongings we had, Miguel pocketing a knife from a drawer. As we prepared to leave through the back window, Calloway grasped my wrist with surprising strength. Don't trust ... double quotes, he rasped, his eyes clearer than they had been in hours. Don't trust ... Sanders. Who's Sanders? I asked, but Calloway had lapsed back into semi-consciousness. A vehicle approached outside, the distinctive thrum of a helicopter growing louder. Time to go, Miguel urged. We slipped through the window and into the trees behind the cabin, circling around to reach the river. As we moved downstream, staying within the tree line, I glanced back to see the helicopter touching down in the clearing. Men in medical uniforms emerged, but so did others, men in tactical gear, weapons visible. Run, I breathed, grabbing Miguel's arm. We fled downriver, keeping to the dense vegetation along the bank. Behind us came shouts, then the sharp crack of rifle fire, Earl warning the newcomers of our escape. The river narrowed as it passed through a rocky gorge, the current growing swifter. We were forced closer to the water's edge, exposed if anyone looked down from the ridge above. There they are, a voice called. More gunfire, bullets kicking up dirt and water around us. We dove behind a fallen tree, momentarily protected. We'll never outrun them, Miguel gasped. I looked at the churning river, then back at Miguel. We don't have to outrun them. He understood immediately, his eyes widening. That's suicide. We don't have a choice. More bullets splintered the log above us. Decision made, we scrambled to the river's edge, took a deep breath, and plunged into the icy water. The current caught us immediately, sweeping us downstream at terrifying speed. I fought to keep my head above water, lungs burning, limbs numbing in the cold. Miguel was somewhere beside me, occasionally visible as we were tossed through rapids. Gunfire continued from the shore, but we were moving too fast to be easy targets. The river carried us around a bend, momentarily out of sight of our pursuers. Ahead, the sound of rushing water grew louder, a waterfall. Miguel caught my eye, pointed to a large branch extending from the shore. I nodded, understanding. As we approached, we both made a desperate grab for the branch. Miguel caught it, then seized my hand as I was swept past. The force of the current nearly tore us apart, but somehow he held on. Inch by excruciating inch, he pulled me toward the shore. We collapsed on the rocky bank, soaked and gasping. Waterfall thundered just 50 yards downstream, a deadly drop we had narrowly avoided. Can you walk? Miguel coughed, water streaming from his clothes. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. We forced ourselves up and stumbled into the trees, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind us. The river had carried us far from Earl's camp, but we had no way of knowing how close we were to the ranger station. We continued downriver, staying well back from the banks where we might be spotted. After what felt like hours, we glimpsed a structure through the trees, a rustic building with a green roof and a radio tower. The ranger station, I breathed. We approached cautiously, watching for any sign of our pursuers. The station appeared quiet, a single vehicle, a Forest Service truck parked outside. What if it's a trap? Miguel whispered. Ortiz told us to ask for Ranger Bennett specifically, I reminded him. It's our best chance. We approached the front door, our sodden clothes leaving a trail of water. A sign indicated we should ring the bell for service. I did so with trembling fingers. The door opened to reveal a woman in a Forest Service uniform, mid-40s, with short gray hair and keen eyes that immediately assessed our bedraggled condition. Can I help you? She asked, hand resting casually near what I realized was a holstered sidearm. We're looking for Ranger Bennett, I said, my teeth chattering from cold and fear. Lydia Ortiz sent us. The woman's expression didn't change, but she opened the door wider. "I'm Bennett. Get inside, quickly." Once we were in, she locked the door and drew the blinds, then turned to us with a different demeanor, entirely. Alert, professional. All pretense of casual ranger dropped. "Ortiz radioed ahead," she explained, pulling towels from a cabinet and handing them to us. "Said you might be in rough shape. Didn't mention you'd be half drowned." "We had to take the scenic route," Miguel said, attempting humor despite his exhaustion. Bennett nodded, not smiling. "They'll be looking for you. We need to move quickly." She led us to a back room, revealing not the office supplies I expected, but a communications center with multiple radios, a computer setup, and maps covering one wall. "You're not really a forest ranger, are you?" I asked. "I am," Bennett replied, typing rapidly on one of the computers. "But I'm also DE Deep Cover. Been tracking drug smuggling operations through these forests for 3 years. Ortiz and I go way back." She pulled up satellite imagery of the surrounding area. "Your friends at the fishing camp have called in reinforcements. They're setting up roadblocks on all the access roads." "How did they find us so quickly?" I asked, clutching the towel around my shoulders. "The Covenant has resources you wouldn't believe," Bennett said grimly. "Money, people, technology. They've been operating for generations, embedding themselves in positions of power throughout the region." Miguel leaned against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "What about Calloway?" Bennett's expression darkened. "The helicopter was intercepted before it reached the hospital. Officially, it experienced mechanical failure and went down in the mountains. No survivors." I closed my eyes. Another death on my conscience. "And Ortiz? Is she safe? For now?" "She's gone to ground with trusted federal agents." Bennett turned back to the computer. "I need to get you two out of here. There's an extraction point 20 miles north where a helicopter or real medical evacuation this time will take you to a secure facility in Washington state." "Washington?" Miguel questioned. "Why so far?" "Because the Covenant's influence is strongest in Arizona, Nevada, and California," Bennett explained. "We need to get you completely outside their territory." As Bennett prepared for our departure, providing us with dry clothes and emergency supplies, she explained more about what Ortiz had discovered. "The Covenant began as a splinter group during the Spanish colonial period," she said, checking ammunition for her service weapon. "They combined Catholic mysticism with indigenous blood rituals, believing that sacrifice would protect their settlements from drought, disease, and tribal attacks." "And that belief survived into modern times?" I asked, still trying to process everything. Bennett nodded. "It evolved. By the late 1800s, they had members in local government, law enforcement, business. The sacrifices continued, but carefully hidden travelers who wouldn't be missed, immigrants, isolated families like the Navarros." "But why?" Miguel pressed. "What do they gain?" "Power," Bennett said simply. "Control. And there are always those who believe in the old ways, that blood feeds the land, ensures prosperity. During the Dust Bowl, their sacrifices increased. Same during drought years. They truly believe they're protecting their communities." A radio on her desk crackled to life. Bennett answered, speaking in coded phrases I couldn't follow. Her expression grew tense as she signed off. "They've found Earl's body," she announced. "Throat cut. They're eliminating witnesses, Earl." I was confused. "But he was working with them." Bennett shook her head. "Earl Hansen was DE2, deep cover like me. He called in your location as soon as you arrived, but not to the Covenant, to us. When the extraction team arrived, he must have tried to help Calloway. The knowledge hit me like a physical blow. We had misjudged Earl completely, and it had cost him his life." "We need to move now," Bennett said, gathering equipment. "They'll be here within the hour." The extraction was a blur of tension and movement, a desperate hike through dense forest, a nighttime river crossing, and finally the thunder of helicopter blades as we were lifted to safety, our pursuers just minutes behind. In Washington, we were debriefed by federal agents, our evidence secured and authenticated. Maria Navarro's journal provided the historical foundation. But it was Ortiz's modern investigation that broke the case wide open. Bank records, property transfers, suspicious death salt pointing to an organization that had operated in the shadows for centuries. The arrests began a month later, after a grand jury indictment remained sealed until the last moment. County officials, business leaders, law enforcement officers, over 30 members of the Covenant were taken into custody simultaneously across 3 states. The woman who had impersonated Deputy Vasquez was identified as Eleanor Whitaker, a direct descendant of Theodore Whitaker. She had disappeared during the arrests, but was found 2 weeks later in Mexico, dead from what appeared to be a ritual suicide. The Navarro family was finally laid to rest in a proper cemetery, their remains recovered from a mass grave near Perdition. Archaeological teams documented the chamber beneath Whitaker's house, preserving the evidence of centuries of ritual sacrifice. As for Miguel and me, we remained under witness protection for nearly a year, until the last of the trials concluded. The story I eventually wrote won a Pulitzer, though I included only what had been made public through court proceedings. Some details were too disturbing, some connections too dangerous to reveal fully. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the night, remembering that whisper in the dugout Ayudanos and wondering if Maria Navarro can finally rest in peace. I wonder, too, if every member of the Covenant was truly identified, or if some remain waiting in the shadows for the right moment to revive their ancient practices. The desert keeps its secrets well, but some secrets, once unearthed, can never be buried again.